Declare the meeting open at 9:30 exactly and acknowledge we're hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respect to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. The meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the DAP Regulations 2011. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on our DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the DAP regulations. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce the members that are participating in this meeting today. My name is Dale Page. I'm the presiding member for today. In the room with me to the left, I have Karen Hyde, Deputy Presiding Member, Clayton Hyam, Specialist Member, and then online with us today from the City of Busselton, we have Councillor Kate Cox and Councillor Anne Ryan. Welcome to you all. Item 2, apologies, there are nil today. Item 3, noting of minutes. Minutes of all previous DAP meetings are available on the DAP website. Moving to Part B of the agenda, the City of Busselton. Item 1, declaration of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation contained within Part B of the agenda and the Part B related information. Could I please confirm by a show of hands that members have considered all information? Thank you. Item 2, disclosures of interest. Could I check with our local government members whether this application has been before you at a briefing or a meeting?
No.
Excellent. No other disclosures of interest have been received at this point. Do any members wish to make any declarations in relation to this item? All right, moving on to the item then. Item 3, Form 1 DAP application, Lot 501-1074, Cape Naturalist Road Naturalist, proposed use not listed, tourist and visitor accommodation, DAP number 24/02813. We have one presenter on this item today, Dion White from Hatch. He'll be speaking in support of the application, and we have allocated Dion 10 minutes to speak today, given there are no other presentations and given he is speaking on behalf of the whole applicant team. We also have Hayley Swift and Patrick Miller from Place Developments, Kristen Knox on Zoom, and Anthony Rowe from Emerge, and Sean McGibbon from Kerry Hill Architects to answer questions from the panel if required. And I remind you that in accordance with our standing orders, your presentation needs to be limited to the time we've allocated you. We've read everything that has been provided, so perhaps stick to the most salient points you want to get across in that time. And when you get close to your time, I will let you know, and then panel members will be invited to ask you questions after. I'm going to ask you to speak up a little bit, because some of us down this end of the table, present company excluded, are old and a little deaf. So if you could speak up, that would be greatly appreciated. And your 10 minutes will start when you are ready.
Thank you very much for the additional time, and as I say, that the panel members or the detailed project team members are on hand to answer any questions. Fair to say, collectively, there's been a lot of work done over the last
too far. Just got a little bit of a lag. Otherwise, I can click from here if you just prompt me.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. Next, thanks. So look, collectively been a lot of effort over there for really just diligently work through those key deferral items and do as much as we can, I guess, to bring together the understanding of what we intend. There's also some pretty significant refinement to the actual around bushfire risk and physical position of chalets in particular, and various technical papers and so on to support that. And that's landed. Next one, please. In terms of a comprehensive update to the overall site plan to spell out not only the physical location, but the intended management regime to support the modifications that we're looking at for the BFP assumptions and the vegetation that goes with it. We feel on balance it significantly reduces measures around bushfire risk and maintains specifically to the deferral points. There was a session with the city and the reviewer just to talk through some of the key assumptions, and we felt to reach agreement on the review of the procurement structure that allows us to achieve the 10 criteria without shifting the location. So we provided tickets and that remains in its current position. In terms of the visual impact at the second deferral, as I think the panel acknowledged in the initial discussion, that as a rural style building in a rural setting, that was appropriate in terms of its visual impact in the wider setting. And whilst there is addition of a water tank, that's again something relatively minor. It's to the south of the property or the pavilion structure, and is something you would expect in a rural landscape. The minimum 10 metre setback from vegetation has been achieved. The key measures in terms of implementation measures for the BMP, we did submit an amended BMP. We had a number of supplementary communications where we submitted additional justification around particularly the FDI, the climate change data and the BAL specifications, and we have reduced the BAL FZ notation on the chalets to the BAL 29, and you'll see through the updated site plan, the supporting plan, sorry, next slide, the significant adjustments to the primary setback in the 3 metre zone, but also the management of the understory within the core vegetation area. Next slide. We've further supported that just over the last week with comprehensive update to the BAL mapping. And next slide. And a comprehensive update just to further illustrate the interaction, I guess, between the 3 scenarios that the DAP pointed out in the deferral, the 3 metre zone, the 10 and the 20, and what that looks like and how that's being tackled in terms of the revised BNP assumptions and what it means for vegetation. Next slide. 0.7 was really the removal of that secondary play area, so that's gone. And then the realignment of the road, as we understand, is no longer required, but even if there's still concern, there's a number of conditions of approval in terms of tree retention, landscape management, which standards that we believe can address any further refinements on site on the building licence stage. Next slide. VIA, we did comprehensive modelling, which was one of the requests within and/or to do within the deferral point. That is supported by detailed point cloud data, so we're able to run very detailed and realistic scenarios, not just of the macro scenario, but more importantly to us also just that micro close sim scenario, looking at very corridors. That showed us what would happen in the 3, 10 and 20 scenario. The 20 metre clearance scenario is not necessary because with the revised BNP assumptions, canopy clearing is not required. We are losing 13 trees out of 290 odd, I think, that are significant and over 5 in trunk diameter. The rest of the management is really to remove some of that degraded understory and rehabilitate that to 5 tolerant species. Next slide. And you can see, next slide, yeah, thank you, sorry. So you can just see some of the understory condition that exists. So we're not talking about wholesale alteration to the macro landscape. We are talking about effectively rehabilitating that understory and immediate vegetation ground, managing bushfire risk and restoring the ecology and landscape values of that immediate local environment. Next slide. In terms of the conditions, we have reasonable agreement with the city. We had a session last week that was reasonably productive. I think we're just seeking one more tweak to the pavilion. We're happy to add a more specific reference to landscape mitigation within that condition if necessary, and we've provided a separate schedule around those. The balance of the conditions around the amended visual impact assessment, we don't think that's necessary. We think the macro issues of the visual impact assessment have already been satisfied by the original assessment. There is the micro or close-in modelling. There are conditions around architectural materials, landscape and tree survey that can deal with further refinement. So council to work that through. The conditions around spring survey, we don't again believe that's necessary given the degraded condition of the understory and the fact that the habitat is not being impacted due to the majority retention of the larger significant 500 mil plus trees. Next slide. Site inspection. Look, the city did undertake a site inspection. Unfortunately, we were not notified that. We would have preferred to probably attend and try and work through and close out some of these issues, but that didn't occur. obviously remains for the DAP to do that site inspection to close out any remaining concerns or issues. But we do feel that we have got a set of conditions. We've got a macro solution that is acceptable. Next slide. And a set of conditions that enable us to respond to that. In terms of the reasons for refusal, I guess just stepping back up is really just to go to that three-way test of the strategic balance of bushfire landscape and tourism experience. And we feel that, you know, starting first, we place most importance and caution on the bushfire issue because of the concerns about that in the initial DAP. So we've got, in our mind, a far more conservative but also reasonable performance-based solution within SPP 3.7 that has reduced risk. Most importantly, within that, we've also been able to find a solution that doesn't have a significant impact on landscape or ecology. It does remove understory, but again, that's degraded, so it'll take what is open degraded paddock and farmland impact, or put that into active management, or restore and remove weed infestation, put in supplementary landscaping that suits the fire environment or manages the fire risk. And most importantly, through that entire process, there's been no reduction in the tourism experience or the quality of the architectural landscape that they're committed to through the proposal. In terms of the recommendation, again, we've got a comprehensive updated modification to the proposal. So we have worked very hard to look to where we can overcome some of council's concerns and actually physically amend both the proposal, but also the management conditions that go with that through the building licence and beyond. We've got the on-site management. Oh, sorry, next slide. That's only words, don't worry about it. On-site management, detailed hydrant tank refinements, vehicle access refinements, active rehabilitation and management of the understory, detailed increases in refinement to development setbacks, comprehensive amendments to the site plan, various supporting plans, which we believe can be further developed. So on balance, we don't feel the reasons for refusal are valid given the additional work we've done. We do believe that approval could reasonably be given to the amended site plan that 15th of December with the modified conditions as refined. But obviously respect the fact that should the DAP still have some outstanding queries, we really hate to be in a position where it gets refused if there's just some minor issues to close out, so but really needed to be deferred again to close out concerns. We'll be open to that as well. So that was all from me, and the team is on hand. I just take any more detailed questions around some of those more backgrounds.
Thank you. If we could minimise the presentation so I can see our online members. We will move to questions of this presenter. Councillors Cox and Ryan, do you have any questions of these presenters?
Not at the moment.
Councillor Cox, any questions?
No, not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Members in the room, any questions of the applicant? Member Hyde.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Thank you for the presentation. In response to the review of the bushfire work that you've done, and particularly that question around the rounding of calculations up and down, and the potential, well, first of all, I'd like to know what your response is to that rounding question. And secondly, the review suggested that you might need an extra 1 or 2 metres if that rounding issue were corrected as they had recommended. What implications that might have. And the review also talked about some queries around sufficiency of water and water pressure. So 3 parts to my question. Thank you.
Anthony, if that's okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Through the presiding member. We actually rounded up, we didn't round down.
Okay.
So there were 2 lots of FDIs that were used. There were ones for the shallows, and then there was one for the shelter. So the shelter was based on an FDI of 52, and that was based on a 1 in 200 APU. So that's the shelter standard. So that one's not in dispute. There's ones regarding the shallows. So when you look at the FDI, the actual figure for the FDI for 1 in 100 APE at the site, work out to 49. We chose 50. And then we selected the 50 from the published AS 3959. So if you go to table 2.6, the numbers that are actually published in AS 3959 are the ones that we've used. So in effect, we've actually rounded up.
Okay,
The important thing is whenever you use a calculator, you need to calibrate AS 3959. Flamesol was used. We used Newcastle as our calculator, but you always need to be pretty careful that the inputs are correct, because it does sometimes shadow from a previous around the numbers. But generally speaking, the most reliable numbers, the numbers that the industry goes by, it's actually what's published in AS 3959. That's what we use. So that's table 2.6 from AS 3959.
okay, so that's the first part of my question. So you're saying that you don't need those extra 1 to 2 meters because you've actually done what you regard to be compliant according to AS standards.
So I
Okay,
should point out that we chose 100 because that includes climate change.
right,
You're entitled to use 50.
okay,
50
and
is even less, that's 47. So we have basically gone conservative.
conservative, which is what the peer review was suggesting. Okay, so what about the water volumes and pressure?
I can talk to that if you like. And this is from advice via our hydraulic consultant that we have engaged early on, and further input from the water corps related to the site. The site is serviced by mains water that runs through an easement through the lot, which goes onto Pullman Resort. So it's quite a large volume of water that passes through the site. In terms of flow and pressure, so we propose to reticulate all water to the chalets in the built form, obviously, the showers and the like. And the pressure, we haven't done any flow and pressure tests yet in terms of what's available, but we do believe that's a downstream exercise that we do need to undertake.
Okay, thank you. If I can continue, thank you. The next question relates to habitat. I understand there's around 2.4 hectares of clearing. I think from your presentation, that includes a calculation around understory. That is not a complete clear felling calculation. But obviously, there's fauna in the area. And what impacts is that understory clearing likely to have, and how do you propose to mitigate that on the basis of, I think, foraging and habitat, which may be there or could potentially be there? Is that for Kirsten?
And can I just, when you answer that question, give me some clarification about how much of that 2.4 hectares is actually classified or in reality is good or very good condition?
Hi, everyone. I think you can hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. In terms of the habitat value, the key, I guess, conservation significant species use the canopy predominantly. So the black cockatoo species and western ringtail possum are probably the main conservation significant species. The proposed bushfire mitigation is retaining. Look, it's a little bit hard once to judge the canopy removal based on 13 trees, just because they all overlap quite a lot, but it's definitely not 2.4 hectares. It is probably closer, I would say, to half a hectare if it's anything, and the project is hoping we will be able to avoid those trees through detailed design as well. So in terms of impact on those species, I would say there would be none. They'll be able to be managed through the fauna management plan conditions. So if there's any possums in the trees proposed for removal, we can relocate them immediately in the site to the adjacent vegetation. They survive very well, possums, in sort of urban house environments. They enjoy all the food that comes with nice gardens. And black cockatoos, the predominant vegetation being modified from a canopy perspective is either peppermint trees or melaleucas, and they are low foraging resource for black cockatoo species. So I anticipate kind of no impact, and you can definitely have fauna spotters present and do all of those sorts of things ahead of clearing.
Thank you.
And the second question I have forgotten, apologies, in terms of the clarifications.
Yeah, I was curious as to how much, we sort of have answered it actually, how much of the 2.4 hectares is classified or is actually in good or very good condition.
So I haven't done an exact overlay, apologies. We know that where the tree canopy is, that is all mapped in good condition, and there's a small area of very good near where the operations shed is on the sort of the Pullman Bunker Bay side of the project. I would say with the 2.4 hectares, you could probably say 80% is in good condition, but good condition will cover a range of weed understory as well. It typically just it usually means there's a lot of disturbance, even though it's good condition. And that can be from grazing, from logging, from a range of things. What good typically means is there's an opportunity to improve the value because there is some structure there. So while it's good condition, the understory is predominantly weeds. There are some native species, but it's predominantly weeds currently, arum lily and paddock grasses.
Another question, please. When you last came to us, you had a VIA prepared by Urbis, one of your consultants, which gave us the macro views, the long views, etc., which was assessed by the Shire and also the DPLH. One of the reasons for deferral included a relook at the VIA subject to how you were going with bushfire, etc. You've provided us with a different approach to the visual analysis, and I'd like to know how you have determined the impact of the measures that you're proposing to take to deal with the bushfire matters impact those longer views, and why you took the decision not to do that broader landscape VIA again.
And again, just while you answer that, because I think we've all got similar questions of you, could you, in responding to that question, could you give us some indication what additional information a full amended VIA would have added to enable us to form a view on likely visual impact, if any? So
I guess just in consultation with Peter at Urbis, we decided the more beneficial response would be to use that detailed point cloud data to do modelling of particularly the chalet area, because that was early on, it was established that that was where the modification of vegetation was going to occur, given that we felt reasonably comfortable about what was happening with the river. So that enabled us to zoom right in on that area quite closely in a way that I guess the macro evaluation doesn't necessarily address. And I guess particularly once we got to a point within a method and understood that really only 13 canopy trees being removed out of the 281 there, that wasn't going to have an impact on the VIA that's more focused on the I guess the macro analysis from those distant viewpoints. Our view is that the detailed update to the VIA is not really going to establish anything material, because the only change to, I guess, the distant view of the site is the removal of 13 large canopy trees. The balance are really just minor refinements of chalet positions against the vegetation line. And we think it's probably more beneficial to focus time and energy on the on-site review of the landscape master plan, the detailed tree survey, and to a degree the architectural materials, if that's considered relevant, to really fine-tune how those chalets sit in that more localised setting, which is not really necessarily what the VIA deals with. It's more really those public vantage points, particularly the lighthouse, the beach, and maybe tree road. We don't see any material impact on those that would benefit from an updated VIA, because to tune up, I guess, the visual appeal of development really requires that more micro on-site assessment, pegging out chalet locations, looking at where trees need to be removed. or avoiding removal of certain trees and then augmenting through a landscape master plan with new landscape if there are any obvious gaps of that micro that need to be dealt with. So,
Sorry, can I just do a follow-up to that? So you're saying that if in doing a modified or updated VIA, you wouldn't necessarily satisfy, for instance, the DBCA's concerns which they seem to still have in relation to the lighthouse?
yeah, we just can't. I mean, DBSA, we thought initially was supportive of the original visual impact, but then seem to have changed their position based on what we believe is a misunderstanding about the extent of clearing that's proposed. That the reference is to 2.4 hectares of clearing, which on face value sounds like a really dramatic change, but when you drill into what's actually happening within that 2.4, it's a minor reduction in significant trees, and most of it's focused on the understory that's at that lower ground level, so it's not having that impact on those distant views. So that's where we didn't really want to invest in a VIA, because hand on heart, we can't see how anything is going to change in terms of the visibility from those macro locations, given that nothing of substantial size or structure is altering, given that we're not clearing that 2.4, we're simply managing the understory. We're undertaking some controlled clearing, but the greater majority of the canopy, which is the thing that stands out in the skyline, is untouched. And that there is still fine tuning that we're committed to on site, as I say, with those final locations of chalets and mitigation that goes with it.
The next question is just around your references to the conditions, without prejudicing where the discussion goes from the panel, but just from a point of clarity. You've focused in on those matters to do with the VIA, which are, I think, 3.2, 3.1. Could I also draw your attention to 3.7F, which also refers to VIA? Could I assume that that would also be something that you would be seeking conviction of?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think it's beneficial though.
Okay.
The existing conditions between 3.7 and 3.4F, which is the trip.
Yeah. There's a couple of conditions in there which talk about removal, and one talks about removal relocation of the play area. My understanding is that you are removing it, not relocating it. Is that correct?
I think that's
That's
reflected in
a
the site.
commitment from the project to remove those pockets that were
Gone.
originally shown on the landscape plan.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. But those conditions are not problematic because they just concern your commitment.
And because there's a detailed landscape master plan condition in there as well.
Okay. My final question, please, is in your presentation, you talked about some further tweaks to a condition. Could you elaborate on that?
I think it was really just that first condition to do with the pavilion location. So I think there was a suggestion in the way the conditions worded that there may be some additional mitigation which we were concerned might imply that it needed to be relocated or moved.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary, but we are happy to look more closely at the landscape master plan and make specific reference to landscape mitigation in that condition.
Okay.
So just on that, sorry, hi, just on that, the only other outstanding question I had was, wouldn't additional landscape design considerations, or not wouldn't it, what impact would that have on bushfire risk? What sort of considerations are we envisaging here, and really how much impact would they actually make from the distant vantage points?
I mean, that's a good question. I guess we probably prefer the condition not be there at all because we're satisfied with the location and the landscape within the master plan. That is in the spirit of just being committed to that on-site refinement. If there's minor tweaks that can be done in the landscape master plan that help, say, address the tank issue that council are concerned about, I guess we're happy to talk that through on site and see if there's a better alternative. I guess at the end of the day, we want security over a layout, mining level, but yeah, committed to refining that as building licence detail goes through, given the nature of the application and the history.
Yeah, can I just add a bit more to that? In terms of the hint at slight modifications to built form, So the project commitment was around trying to minimise vegetation clearance and in particular significant trees. So there's room with, Kerry Hill's input to make slight adjustments because we know what the APZs are around these built forms now to actually get away from certain particular significant trees. So there's room within the project, once we get the detailed vegetation survey done on site, to be able to twist and slightly rotate these buildings, in minor positions to get that to work in favour for both environmental and still meet the bushfire considerations.
So back to the communal building though, and that condition 3.1b, wouldn't it be more impactful actually, and you've already settled on a draft design for that building, but wouldn't it be more impactful to add some wording to the condition that deals with colours and materials to say those need to be satisfaction of the city, but they should be of such a nature that they minimise the visual impact rather than some landscape considerations which may or may not have impact on bushfire?
It could be both. And in fact, when we discussed the conditions with the city, we did have a discussion about the broader condition on 3.5 architectural materials. And initially we were concerned that that would reopen the discussion about architectural materials because it was a very detailed set in VA. Explained that they find it's useful to have the condition in there just in case there's refinements or changes through the building licence. And I guess we were happy to accept it on that basis, but I guess that condition could be equally applied specifically to the pavilion materials and any adjustments there as well.
Sorry, can I just add one thing about the discussion with the city around that particular condition of the communal building? We were very specific in asking the question, is a mitigation measure that you're after the relocation of the building? If it's not, can you describe to us what those mitigation measures might look like? We mentioned materials, schemes, landscape. They specifically pointed to landscape and wanted that included. But to your point, we're much more comfortable if it's
Right. Anything more from
Nothing from me, thank you.
Just one, I suppose it's almost a rhetorical question. From a planning point of view, in giving an approval, there's a desire to have a degree of certainty on what we are looking at, what we're approving. I suppose when I look at the commitment plan, it's sort of something of a trust me plan. So I just want to get a degree of comfort from you in terms of how much change is there really to that plan to something that is actually going to be on site?
Actually, not much at all. And our view is that the primary issues around the threshold setbacks that are related to the BNP, which is the sort of primary concern for everyone, is dealt with and addressed within that. That there is a detailed point cloud survey. We've done detailed pegging of the chalet locations. We're happy to go back through that exercise and just do some very minor fine tuning, but I think we're talking about maybe half a metre here, half a metre there. We're not talking about wholesale shift to the layout that would then open up a can of worms around bushfire and or visual impact. We're talking about continuing to work to do that fine tuning through the building licence, which particularly for these resort developments in a landscape setting is not to say that been pegged already, but I think to do that, repeg and do that with the city would be helpful to get the other conditions satisfied on the way through as well. I think it would be a constructive way to reconnect that collaboration and get the project delivered.
So in effect, that is the plan, and the conditions around it are going to cause the tweaking.
Yeah, and in the way, I guess, the evolution between any other planning application license would be.
Okay, thank you.
Just can I add to that as well? Sorry. What we're very comfortable about once that site plan was produced is that it demonstrates that what was asked of the project team in terms of APZs locating significant trees on the site and the commitment to hydrants and standpipes and turning templates is that we can accommodate all of those things without major shifts in building locations.
Thank you.
And then just to reiterate, the design of this project, the paper exercise, it was a physical exercise, but we spent quite a long time actually on site understanding the topography, understanding the vegetation and the parameters of what we were dealing with to actually try and locate these. So there has been a lot of thought put into their actual location to try and make them as comfortable as possible, within the topography, within the vegetation, and then bringing on top of that these environmental factors and the bushfire factors on top of that. So it has been a very physical exercise to create the piece of paper, to create the drawing. So it's almost worked in reverse.
Thank you. We will now move to questions of the local government officers. We have Emma Craddock, Andrew Watts, Joanna Wilson and Gary McMahon with us today for the City of Busselton. Would you like to make any comments on the deputations that have been made, or would you like us to go straight to questions? And when I say comments, we're not asking you to summarise what's in the RA. We've read that, but any comments on the deputations that have been made, or happy just to go to questions? Questions? All right. Well, are there any questions of the local government officers? I'll start with our members online. Member Ryan, do you have any questions of the officers?
Yes, if I can ask, I note that there are 8 conditions that haven't been met. Could any of those conditions be satisfied, in their opinion, via, if we were to approve this application today, could those conditions be satisfied easily, or are they more of a go away and relook at the plan and come back and with another option?
Can I just clarify, Councillor, what conditions you're talking about? Conditions that have been satisfied, 8 that haven't been satisfied. Are those the reasons for refusal that have been provided?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The city's officers like to respond to that?
I guess in terms of the city's views of whether they could be satisfied, in our opinion, we're still unclear as to the extent of clearing that's required for the asset protection zones. Whilst visiting the site, we have a differing opinion in terms of the vegetation on the site. So city officers visited with the city's ecologist, and the site was essentially peppermints, marries, especially during in the riparian zone. The understory was sword sedge, high bersha and bracken fern. Very healthy, in very good condition. The actual marries, it was clear that they were being foraged by black cockatoos. There was a number of gun nuts on the trees, and the ecologist confirmed on the ground that they are being foraged, they are being used. There's a number of references in terms of 500mm trees, whereas our ecologist disagreed, and that should have been actually 300mm as your reference for clearing permits. But notwithstanding that, we are looking about, there's a significant amount of peppermints and marries on the tree on site that are below that, but very healthy and support a significant amount of fauna and flora on the site. So at this stage, we're unclear of exactly how much of that needs to be removed for the asset protection zone. And especially within the riparian zone, it's very healthy, it's very thick. So we just don't actually have that information. We're unclear. So at the moment, there's reference to 13 trees, but in practice on the site, there's a significant amount of additional vegetation, additional number of trees, and we're just unclear of what that could.
So can I just check with you what the councillor has asked is whether the draft conditions of approval will address some of those 8 reasons for refusal. So apart from trees, you think that the draft conditions of approval, you're saying they won't address the vegetation removal issue, but what else will they or not?
Without having an understanding of exactly what that impact may be, it's very difficult to understand what the visual impact may be, but then also understanding the full compliance with the bushfire framework and the environmental framework. So it's very difficult without that information to address that just by conditions. So at the current time, it is a concept plan, and a concept plan that we don't agree that it can actually be, is going to be in practice how it's proposed to be. So no, we're not convinced that by conditions that you can address all the concerns that the city still has.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Councillor Ryan?
Yes, thank you.
Do you have any other questions of the officers?
No.
Councillor
Thank you.
Cox, any questions of the city officers?
Yes, I do. My question relates to there seems to be some contention around, and this is probably to the city's bushfire consultant, some contention around the method 2 calculations for the chalets, and that they have been incorrectly applied by rounding up figures rather than rounding down. Now, I note that the proponents stated that they were actually rounded down. So we have some contention here about rounding up and rounding down. And the proponent states that they've taken a conservative approach, but it looks to me like there is some difference of opinion with the compliance with the Australian standard and the rounding up and rounding down. So I'd like some clarity around that, please.
Okay. When I was asked to review the calculations, Mr. Rowe said he was using a method 2 calculation. So I did the method 2, which is actually taking the inputs into the formulas, et cetera, et cetera. As Mr. Rowe just mentioned now, he actually referred back to the actual method 1 type tables that are within AS 3959 and had used those. When I did the method 2 calculations to the bit, that's where we got that discrepancy, and I thought he must have rounded down. I actually didn't go back to the method 1 tables that Mr. Rowe referred to, table 2.6, which uses the FDI of 50, which has already been pre-calculated, and I've just double-checked them, and he is correct.
So
There is a discrepancy between
you're in agreement?
that metre odd so calculations that I was talked about in the first instance. Yes, I agree that Mr. Rowe has used table 2.6, which is a legitimate method 1 calculation instead of the detailed one. I immediately jumped into the more complex one, and you're always going to get some variance with that, and I just made the assumption that he'd rounded down, hence there was a slight difference in the little table I put together. But I've just gone through all these calculations based on the table now, and that bit's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, does that answer your question?
Thank you. That clarifies that. The next question I have is regarding, the next question I have for the city staff is regarding, there also seems to be some difference of opinion in the amount of clearing required for compliant APZ. So the city have stated that there will be 2.4 hectares approximately of clearing. The proponent is stating that there will be nothing substantially cleared, just some understory and 13 trees. I would like to have some more clarity around how the city have come to 2.4 hectares of clearing. And we have already heard the city state that in their opinion, the understory is very healthy. It does not consist of weeds and arum lilies predominantly. So there's some difference of opinion there as well.
Thank you, Councillor. And in responding to that question, I think the applicant made the point that of that 2.4 hectares, a chunk of that was the understory. So when we're looking at the visual impact, some of that 2.4 hectares was the understory that you won't necessarily see from the lighthouse and other places. So respond to Councillor Cox's question with that, and also that issue. I think they are. The 2.4 hectares, what does that include? Is it understory as well?
I was initially contracted as a bushfire consultant for this, but I've also been an ecologist for 20 years and used to work for the department. I just raised one comment though. The bushfire risk isn't just the trees, it's the understory. And with regards to the ringtail possums that are on site, mentioned, I haven't been on site. I was 2018, but it's a long time ago. I can't remember what I did yesterday, let alone what's there. But the Shire officers mentioned, and I've had driven past, there was a lot of sword sedge in the understory, as well as mixture of weeds and stuff, as Kirsten had mentioned. The lepidosperma, or the sword sedge, is actually a really important critical habitat for ringtail possums. When it gets hot up in the trees, particularly in the sparse peppermint woodlands, they will come down into that thick, dense sword sedge where they can get up to 10 degrees cool. So it's not just the trees where they live, they actually need that full dynamic. They're very susceptible to heat stress in this sort of stuff. And that lepidosperma understory, which is that horrible, crappy looking stuff that rips you to bits when you walk through it. But it is dense and it does have cool areas of habitat through that. That would need to be removed in a fire sense, although it's very hard to burn. Once you get a lot of heat into it, it does burn and it's really dense and it does cause quite a lot of flames. So sorry, I know I'm also here on a bushfire consultant, but I did provide a little bit of advice on the habitat stuff.
That's all good. Does the city want to further respond to Councillor Cox's question?
Yeah, in relation to where did the 2.4 hectares come from, that was provided by the proponent. The table on page 7 sets that out, and that was the area that we were given by them.
Okay, so can we just jump back to the proponent for a minute? Can you clarify for this panel whether that 2.4 hectares includes so this is with us having visual impact in mind. That 2.4 hectares, is it 2.4 hectares or is it a quantity of vegetation that exists as understory as well?
Let Kirsten explain that. She's more articulate than we are at that one.
Did you get that question, Kirsten?
No, could you repeat that? Sorry, please.
So we're trying to determine the 2.4 hectares, that number came from the proponent, not from the city.
Yep.
We're trying to determine whether that 2.4 hectares includes understory. How have you quantified that? What is comprised, or what comprises that 2.4 hectares?
So the 2.4 hectare is a direct APZ and what it covers from a spatial perspective. So it's the 19 metre and 16 metre, depending on slope setback around each of the chalets. And it's literally just a direct calculation of that area overlaid on top of the site. Understory includes the paddock grasses, it includes the weeds, it includes the leptospermum that Gary mentioned. So it includes all of that, and the locations and density of those different values vary in that 2.4 hectares. So I haven't done a specific breakdown, unfortunately, for the panel discussion. Apologies, but I guess so in our perspective, it's the understory that's largely going to be modified, and that might include complete removal, but the intent is also to bring back planting and a management regime through the client's operations, and to keep the dead fuel and different things managed low threat, a bit like they do at the Pullman Resort, that kind of thing. If you've been there, it's still quite vegetated. There's still gardens, those sorts of things. So in answer to the question, I can't provide a specific value, but it's a direct spatial response to the APZ outline. And we've just gone APZ equals this equals 2.4 hectares. But
thank you. Councillor Cox, does that answer your question?
It kind of answers my question. Yes, it answers my question. I just have another couple of questions, if I may, to the officers. With the clearing of a compliant APZ around the chalets, in your opinion, will this cause visual impact issues, and will it affect landscape and ecological values?
Yes, in our view, yes, that would result in visual impact concerns, the same as what DBCA raised as well. The APZ, the implementation of an APZ would result in that visual impact from their locations, in particular the lighthouse, which is why they also raise those concerns. So we do have the same views in that respect.
Hence your reasons for refusal.
Our reasons for
okay. Councillor Cox, anything further from you?
Just one last question, if I may. Are there still visual impact concerns regarding the shelter in place, the large building set up on the hillside? Are there, I have heard mention that there may be some landscaping conditions may be able to address the colour, materials, etc. Are officers comfortable with the proponent stating that they will do some landscaping, given that that landscaping may then affect bushfire safety?
In our view, yes, the shelter on site building will still be visible. We've always had that view. As same as the Department of Planning have always raised that view in terms of, yes, it will be visual, and unfortunately there is no way of screening that as part of the visual impact assessment. While you may be able to do some strategic planting in certain location or materials may assist with that, blending that in the landscape. But ultimately from certain viewpoints and from the lighthouse, yes, it would be visible.
Any further questions, Councillor Cox?
No, that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members in the room, Member Hyde.
Thank you. You went on a site visit, and the result of that site visit is obviously, in your opinion, some confusion from the Shire's opinion as to what's being cleared, where things are being sited, what's of value, etc. Why would you not include the proponent and their consultants in that site visit to assist you in understanding the commitment plan and the work that they had done?
To be honest, we didn't actually get the plan. We only got it just before Christmas. We haven't had a huge amount of time to actually deal with the plan that was submitted to the commitment plan. So unfortunately, it was during that shutdown when everybody else was shut down. So officers did have the benefit of being able to go out on site and work through. It was very helpful that they've actually pegged where some of those chalets are. So we do have an understanding of where they are located on the property. And in terms of our ecologist is very aware of compliant asset protection zones and what that means. So which is why based on where those chalet locations were, we were working through what that meant in terms of tree removal.
Thank you. In terms of the applicant's submission on some of the conditions of approval, and again, not prejudicing where we'll go with this, but just for clarity's sake, there are a number of aspects of the conditions that you've prepared to do with flora and vegetation management plan, fauna management plan, tree protection plan, etc. You also have in there spring survey and fauna survey and habitat assessment. Now, the applicant is asking for spring survey and fauna survey and habitat assessment to be removed from that condition 3.4. Do you believe that they could adequately prepare fauna and vegetation management plan and fauna management plan and tree protection plan without those survey aspects? I would like to refer it back to the applicant as well. I'm interested in the Shire's opinion.
DBCA have requested targeted flora and fauna surveys, which would normally consist of your spring flora surveys as well.
Okay. Does that necessarily need to be a spring survey?
I'm actually going to direct it to Mr.
Sorry, Gary, could you?
That's okay. I would say yes, it would need to be spring, even though the understory is degraded. We do have a significant number of rare orchids, etc., which come through even in pasture grasses. They only flower, maybe this year it was only 3 days during September, which becomes hectic to try and fit in. But you need them in flower to identify them. And particularly when you've got 160 odd rare species of orchids in the south wing, the city of Busselton alone, trying to identify, is it a common one or a rare one? You really need to know when it's in flower. And that is generally late August to November.
Yeah, understood, spring.
So it does need to be in spring.
Okay, presiding member, may I refer that question back, because you've specifically asked for 3.4A spring survey and 3.4D fauna survey and habitat assessment to be deleted. So just in the context of what we've heard from SHAR and their technical advisors, what's the position on those surveys as a piece of information that would form the other elements of 3.4? Are you satisfied that you could do the rest of 3.4 without those surveys?
I'll answer that more broadly and then I'll hand
it
to clarify. But I think that goes back to what panel member Hyam mentioned is we don't want an approval that's open-ended and may cause into question the fundamental layout that we put forward in the amended site plan. So we're happy between planning approval and building licence to work to refinements so within the confines of the site plan, the architectural materials, the landscape master plan, and the management conditions that sit within the conditions as they're proposed. But we don't feel it's necessary to fundamentally revisit, I guess, the course we've already had in terms of flora and fauna on the site and put at risk being able to implement. So I think the specifics of the work that we've done on both of those fronts will make
So are you saying that the work that you've done is equivalent to a spring survey and a fauna survey and habitat assessment at this point, and therefore that information exists and this condition as written could be edited?
Do you want to address that, please?
Yes, the survey work being used is from 2018, which is the work Ecosystem Solutions did, and it was outside of spring. So no, it doesn't meet a spring survey requirement. With the modification required, management plans can address the values, but it wouldn't. We haven't specifically surveyed in the survey period for targeted flora. Fauna, you can, whether they're present or not, you can assume they're present. We also are of the view this project is likely to require a clearing permit because the exemptions won't apply. So the requirement to address fauna and flora values will be addressed through the clearing permit process with Department of Water and Environmental Regulation as well. So there's a second layer there addressing.
Kirsten, would that require you to do a spring survey for the purpose of that clearing?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It'll just, we'll have to, so potentially, yes. That'll be a discussion with them in terms of the data that's available and what they require.
Okay, so just to close out on this question, I understand from Kirsten that was a thorough answer. What impact does this have on the project if A and D were potentially to remain in that condition? If, as Kirsten's saying, you may have to do those things anyway.
But I'm being Kirsten's hand, so I guess if there's a subsequent process that deals with that, we'll leave it to that subsequent process and have that integrated into the management plan.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll leave that there.
I think this is really targeted at Kirsten's question, but we go back to the 2.4 hectares and the understory that's valuable for the ringtail possum. And I know you haven't, or you can't tell us what percentage of that is of that quality understory, but of the rest of the land, there must be quite a bit of that understory available for the ringtail possum.
Yes, there would be, and we can revegetate areas as well, but again, I haven't done a direct comparison, but basically anything else that is where there's canopy, we're not going to touch. So that's all available to species on site.
So it's the large majority of the site that's still available for that purpose. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Plan just after the ballot essentially shows the APZ sign over an area for the balance site, so you get like a spatial sense of.
I think I don't think we need that now because it's more hearing this than say.
I'm just looking at it, sorry, just quickly visually, I'd say it's probably an equivalent area in terms of still being under canopy without being modified, just from a quick visual check.
Thank you.
I have quite a few questions. Can you confirm for me, and I'm talking to the city officers now, that the brief that you provided, Gary, is exactly as outlined in the 3 dot points in his report on page 376 of the agenda?
We believe so, but it's been some months since that, so I don't have to confirm 100%.
And we don't have that immediately at hand.
Sorry?
We don't have that information immediately at hand.
But those 3 dot points in your mind are what you asked Gary to do, yep? Largely, largely.
Yeah,
okay.
Fairly consistent.
Okay. The report prepared talks quite a bit about the need, or ideally the need for a broader landscape assessment for the area prior to development. So who should ordinarily conduct an assessment like that?
Bushfire, yeah.
City?
No, it would normally be conducted by a level 3 bushfire practitioner, but
would engage that practitioner ordinarily to do a broad landscape assessment for an area.
If it's a requirement under the policy, which it isn't in this instance, but let's say it was a subdivision, the developer would normally ask for a bushfire practitioner to prepare a plan, and part of that is to go through that broad assessment process.
So, but if it's not a subdivision, so for an...
It's not required in this situation for vulnerable. My notes were more that it just seems incongruous.
Okay. When I look at the reasons for refusal, they point to a desire, in my view, for any proposal to minimise bushfire risk, to minimise vegetation removal to an acceptable level, to minimise visual amenity impact to an acceptable level. So those 3 things really need to tick all those boxes, right, to avoid those reasons for refusal. So I'm wondering if development of even one of those large single houses that we have scattered along that land would even be possible. Would they even achieve all those 3 things? Is that assumption correct?
And it's exactly the same considerations for a single house. And yes, we would be looking at the visual impact and essentially where on that block it should be sited in terms of reducing that visual impact and the bushfire risk and in terms of preserving vegetation.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, given it's rural land, would a large farm shed be considered the same way?
Yes, so essentially we were recently in the tribunal for exactly that reason for a single house in terms of the visual impact and addressing those issues.
So I'm talking about the rural nature of it, therefore you're likely to get farm sheds.
Yeah.
If it's still in the landscape value area, the scheme would still call that in needing a DA and therefore need to be assessed against the relevant framework, which includes the Lure Naturalist Ridge policy and consideration of visual impact.
So, and I'll move to visual impact in a minute, but so bushfire, the consultant's report includes some commentary that he doesn't consider the classification of the vegetation to be removed as having the level of significance that would prevent the establishment of an APZ to achieve BAL 29. Can you comment on that?
Want me to?
Yeah. I don't want Gary to comment on it. I would like the city officers to comment on whether you agree with that or not.
I think what it comes down to is the conservation value, and you're looking at two separate things here. You're looking at one thing is bushfire, and then one, setting that aside, is the environment. In the context of a bushfire assessment, is it you value life over habitat? Yes. In the context of the environment, the conservation value that provides, you would want to see remain.
Harry, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, they're two separate things. As somebody for 20 years has done both, it's very conflicting sometimes when you write an ecological report and then you do a bushfire report and they don't talk the same language. Effectively, when I was looking at this site, I used the broader Vegetation Association, which is the first, I call them the thick crayon type. So basically they're species with similar tree species, so same structure. It's called a Vegetation Association. You can have different species within that. When I looked at what the Vegetation Association was, I can't remember the number, I should be able to find it. A lot of it is already conserved. Yeah, Jarrah, Marri, Pepe over, whatever. To the point where, while I'm not saying it's not valuable, I think any vegetation that's left in the scapes is valuable. If you're asking me as a firefighter from 27 years of running into buildings and doing that sort of stuff, both all around Australia, I would value people over the ecology. Some of my staff disagree with me on that, but I'd always value the people first, then the structure, and then the habitat. And in my view, that type of vegetation, I don't like saying the word isn't significant enough, doesn't warrant trying to preserve it for the sake of trying to preserve lives. Life's far more important, and having an asset protection zone is far more valuable and far more effective at saving lives.
Thank you for that. Now, in relation to bushfire, has the city and the proponent reached agreement on the proposed implementation contained in the applicant's site plan of proposed project commitments? So I'm not talking about environmental impact here, I'm talking just on bushfire. Have we reached agreement on bushfire?
I think based on the project plan of commitments, we would be comfortable that they would meet the bushfire requirements in terms of an APZ, the shelter on site building, etc. Still some details outstanding.
Okay. Moving on to a VIA, and noting there's a lot of commentary about the lack thereof of an updated VIA and conditions that require that. So I'm trying to understand, I asked the applicant, but I'm giving you the opportunity. What additional information would an amended or updated VIA have added, apart from the graphics that the applicant has provided, that would enable us to form a view on likely visual impact? What would the VIA add?
I think the last page of the VIA as provided talks to the fact that if there is significant change from bushfire, additional mitigation measures would need to be considered. So that could be relocating the chalets, I guess the shape of the roof and things like that. So it would let us know if it is viewed from those significant key viewpoints, what extra mitigation measures might assist in reducing that impact.
And there's a bit of a statement in here, but I'm wanting your feedback on it. So on page 15 of your RA or page 20 of the agenda, you've got a statement that the development is likely to result in a significant and highly visible intrusion. I want to work out, does that statement arise only from the clearing proposed? And other factors contribute to visual impact. For example, wouldn't numerous small-scale buildings with colours and finishes that blend well with the surrounding landscape be better from a visual impact perspective than a large footprint, two-storey, light-coloured, reflective single house? So why would you need a VIA to make a call on that? Isn't what you have enough?
Sorry, if I may ask, on page 15 of the RA?
You've got a statement on page 15 of your RA or page 20 of the agenda that the development is likely to result in significant and highly visible intrusion. So when I look at what has been proposed and I compare it to the other big houses that exist there, the big white glass houses, what do you base that statement on, given the different nature of the design of this development to what already exists there? Do you really need a visual impact assessment to make that call?
We wouldn't know the full extent without understanding, depending on how much clearing, we don't actually know the full extent of that visual intrusion from those viewpoints. So it's that understanding that we don't currently have and we're unable to provide comments on. So that revised visual impact assessment would take into account that clearing and then give us that full picture of what that visual impact would be, which is why we've been asking for that revised visual impact assessment.
Because I think potentially if you had multiple buildings spread across, you've actually got more APZ areas, and so therefore you potentially have additional clearing as to your example of the bigger house in one location, that will have its singular APZ around it. If you've got multiple various buildings spread across, you've got the APZs around all of those. That results in potentially additional clearing. And given that we don't know the extent of trees that are under the 500 millimetre size that the applicant has referenced, we don't know what the cumulative visual impact of that will be.
So when let's say a VIA had been submitted and it had shown some impact, like what do you decide is acceptable visual impact or not? Or do you rely solely on what the report says and what DPLH says? Does the city make a judgment call? Because DPLH provides you with an input, right? And the report provides you with an input. What would you be satisfied with? Do you have, I'm not saying with this because we don't know, but what would you be satisfied with ordinarily? Do you make a judgment call or do you simply align yourselves with what DPLH and the report?
We take the advice, yes, we take the advice of DPLH as well as DBCA because they do have visual experts within their department as well. So we take into account both those advices from those agencies, especially in particular when it's, for instance, DBCA, when it is from the National Park and their property. But yes, we take that into account and then we would form that judgment. But no, we do take that advice from those experts though.
Okay. I guess it's my view, and I'm asking you to comment on this, that the objectives of some of the key components of the planning framework that apply to this site have competing objectives to some degree. Could you comment on that statement? Do you agree or not?
I agree, definitely they do. They conflict with one another.
Aside from the stuff we've discussed, it appears from your previous RA that the proposal meets the other requirements of the. So we had a concern about bushfire visual impact assessment and clearing, but the other planning documents that apply to this, the previous RA, I recall, acknowledged that the other requirements of the underlying planning framework were met, land use permissibility, setbacks, all that type of stuff. Is that a correct summation?
Yes, so it meets setbacks, the requirements of the rural zone, etc. in terms of, yes, those.
Nothing's changed in that respect from the previous RA.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Unless there are one more from Member Hyam.
I want to ask the applicants a follow-up question, if I may, to do with the trees and the understory. And there's a comment being made all the time that we don't know how many more trees are being lost. Can you respond to that?
Kirst, do you want to take that?
I can. I was just going to clarify quickly. It's only just a quick clarification in terms of area, back to that 2.4, 1.16 of that has canopy cover. So that's the bit where we're modifying, where there might be native vegetation, we're modifying. In terms of the trees removed. We haven't surveyed below 500 mil from a detailed survey perspective, so we don't have a point cloud for that. But based on my knowledge of the site, I've been to site a few times reviewing photographs in preparation for this in terms of considering the type of modification. We don't think there would be a significant number of those smaller trees that would need to be removed. A lot of what we're talking about is under pruning, so lifting up the canopy from the ground, tidying up the grass tree skirts. A lot of the grass trees are quite overgrown on site, so trimming them, even burning them a little bit, those sorts of things, and mowing grass, that kind of thing. So again, can't give you a specific number with regard to small trees, but we have looked at that and considered that as part of what the APZ might look like. And would that result in complete thinning, which then means the canopy cover changes, or is it not going to be that noticeable? And we think it'll be not that noticeable when you're looking from an aerial perspective.
I can just add to that, we've been asked for an implementation level of detail that will occur in the subsequent steps that we need to take in order to get the project delivered safely with environmental considerations in place. And also just to confirm that I didn't realise the city was referencing the pegs on site when they went on the 5th, but they are not the correct pegs. They're very dated. So if they are looking at an ecological impact with where those pegs were, they were the initial pegs that we did before we even submitted for DA. We've been using spray paint to get more accurate understandings on site of where the chalets sit. The surrounding environment is incredibly important to the landowners. They're in love with this plot of land. So wherever we can, we've been instructed, whatever we can retain, please do so, as long as it's still a safe environment from a bushfire perspective, which is why we've worked through that first and foremost with the city.
Thank you. Are you distinguishing between native vegetation and remnant vegetation? Your report talks a lot to remnant vegetation and that goes towards, and I think you quote the Lewin SPP 6.1 when you talk about an extraordinary landscape which is part of the nation's heritage. To my mind, remnant vegetation is that which is mature, very old and potentially original, whereas what we have here is an area of farmland that was cleared. Indeed, Bunker Bay 25, 30 years ago was cleared paddock. That's new vegetation. So can I understand how your assessment works in terms of areas that have been revegetated, and, you know, whether you're distinguishing between significant trees of a particular age, or is it just the girth? Is it, how are you going about that assessment?
There was both on site that we viewed. There was the significant marries that are habitat trees that were clear. Our ecologist made it clear that they were being foraged. One wasn't, it was aged for to form hollows, but didn't actually have one yet. And then there was the peppermints as well on the property, quite a substantial amount of peppermints. But then there was also planted vegetation as well. So there was the mix of them all.
Yes, peppermints grow very well everywhere. They're almost a weed species in my view, but they do grow very, very well. Could I also refer that to Kirsten with your knowledge of the site and previous survey work that's been done? How much of what we're talking about here is sort of old original vegetation, and how much of it is post the cessation of the farming activity that was on the land?
Yeah, we think most of the understory is post farming activity on the land. With the trees, anything above 500 mil will indicate it's been there for a while. So like marry trees can be 100+ years, but we're not actually proposing to remove any of those at all. With the peppermint trees, like as you noted, they can grow quite quickly if the conditions are right. They can be a little bit harder to age. Again, we don't of the 13 trees, there's a couple that were over 1 metre diameter, so they are large, but the ones that we're saying are removed are either in the building footprint currently or within the 3 metre defendable space. And the shuffling of the buildings that Dion referred to earlier is to try and shuffle the building so that the trees outside the 3 metre defendable space, and we can then just do the modification of branches and different things as opposed to the full removal. So I would say it's the 13 trees, which are the pre-farming activity on the site, which is being impacted. The majority of the other vegetation is post-farming activity.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Right. Yes, Councillor Ryan.
May I just ask of the proponent, there's in their response, it's got the City of Busselton recommendation for refusal does not align with the strategic planning framework. What specifically are they referring to? And then if I could get the officers to respond to their differing point of view as well, please.
Yeah, look, I think it just comes back to that three-way test that's in the various state planning policies that at a headline level, it does talk to the need to balance environmental, bushfire and tourism objectives. The site is nominated in that as a tourism site, and the three, I guess, overlapping and somewhat conflicting circles around bushfire risk, visual impact and tourism experience are quite explicit around the stability and nuance we feel that we've struck that balance.
And we do reach an acceptable solution for bushfire.
Yeah, that's right. With bushfire as priority, as we said initially.
No, through the presiding member, something interesting happened on the 25th of November 2025, where it was actually clarified, and I'll read it from the explanatory guide, so it might actually help your consideration in terms of the bushfire hazard and placement of tourism development within it, and also a requirement for a broader landscape assessment. The explanatory note now provides tourism land uses. The broader landscape assessment is not required for tourism land uses, recognising that many are remote and nature-based areas. So they've now expressly excluded the application of element 1, which is broader landscape assessment, and then is it avoidable in the first instance connections. So what the state has now come out and said that tourism will go in high risk areas.
Councillor Ryan, does that answer your question?
Can I have the staff comment in relation to that? So what is their idea of strategic planning framework, and why are they applying that to these the refusal?
So the basic principles of the SPP, the bushfire state planning policy, is that you avoid the bushfire risk in the first instance, unless where it's unavoidable. On this particular lot, there is a number of cleared sections within the lot that avoids clearing. So there's a number of conflicting elements of this proposal, but the state planning policy does talk about avoiding that risk if it's possible.
But wouldn't that then create a visual impact?
It's a visual impact, and yeah, so that's what I mean. There's a number of competing elements.
Councillor Ryan, anything further from you?
No, that's all. Thank you.
All right. I suggest we now move to the report. We have a report in front of us that recommends refusal of this application for a number of reasons. I am going to ask whether any member wishes to move that recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Cox. Do I have a seconder? All right, so that recommendation for refusal lapses due to lack of a seconder. I therefore recommend we don't have an alternate recommendation tabled for us. We haven't been provided with an alternate, we didn't necessarily request one. We do have some conditions of approval, possible conditions of approval provided by the city. I will put on the table an alternate recommendation for approval of the application, and that recommendation will include the preamble that's captured in the recommendation for refusal, but we're just changing it to approval. So it would be that the regional DAP resolves to 1, accept, and 2, approve. And what I would suggest is in that list of plans, we add the site plan of project commitments that has more recently been provided. So that as a preamble with the conditions that have been suggested by the city in the first instance. We can seek to amend those as we go through, but I'm putting that on the table. I will move that as an alternate recommendation.
Presiding member.
Seconded, Member Hyde. All right, I will talk to that then as an alternate recommendation for approval. Look, no one is saying this is an easy one. That's why we're back here twice. The recommendation for refusal in the city's report is supported by numerous reasons for refusal. In my view, when I looked at distilling these down, there is one key issue that I needed to get my head around. And in my view, the key issue is not possible for a proposal like this to tick all those boxes. Something's got to give. We've got to make a judgment call on, in our minds, what's more important in this situation than other things. So given the competing objectives and requirements of some of the key components of the planning and legislative framework that apply to the site, it would even be very difficult for most development proposals to tick the boxes. To reduce the risk of bushfire, vegetation needs to be cleared, but there are environmental and visual amenity impact concerns about the level of clearing required to reduce bushfire risk to an acceptable level. And as we heard earlier, yes, you can put the buildings in the bits that are already cleared, but then there's a visual impact assessment. So I also note each agency involved or consulted has really only raised concern about the issues within their remit, and rightly so, I guess. And in my view, the City of Busselton has taken the approach of including all the key and competing issues as reasons to refuse the application. This is not a criticism of the city staff. The issues are significant, they're complex, so I understand that that might be a more conservative view, in my view, more conservative approach taken by the city. This panel, however, was established partly to make difficult decisions on complex matters, and therefore I think it's our role to weigh up the competing issues raised and to decide whether an appropriate compromise lies between minimisation of bushfire risk and minimisation of environmental and visual amenity impacts of the proposal. When this application was before this panel in July last year, my key concern was the conflicting views that existed at that point on bushfire risk and what were considered acceptable responses to managing that bushfire risk. I was, and I think I stated it for the record, I was less concerned about the clearing of vegetation and potential visual amenity impacts at that point. This is still my position. I'm pleased to see that agreement has been reached on bushfire risk and the management actions to do so. I appreciate the city's bushfire consultant's explanation as to why the previously proposed 3-metre defendable zone in itself wasn't practical or appropriate, and I support the implementation of increased asset protection zones and the other mitigation measures contained in the applicable site plan of proposed project commitments and as outlined in the city's RA. I appreciate that the actions and measures required to mitigate bushfire risk mean that more clearing of the site is necessary. But I also note some of the comments that the classification of the vegetation to be removed and some of the responses to the questions today, I don't think has the level of significance that would prevent the establishment of those APZs to achieve BAL 29. I also note there are separate state and federal environmental approvals processes that need to be followed or may need to be followed in relation to clearing of significant vegetation, and there's a whole lot of rigour that goes around that. I am quite familiar with the area, obviously not as familiar as others in the room, having visited, walked and stayed in the area numerous times, and I have been back to the area since July and had another look from a couple of points. Given that, and in reviewing the visual impact assessment and the supplementary information that has been provided since the last meeting, it is my view that any visual impact of the current proposal is much less of an issue than bushfire concerns, and actually less of an issue than I feel it's being made out to be. In my view, the buildings that form part of this development are modest, low-level structures that have been thoughtfully designed in terms of location, form, materials, and colours to blend well with the natural environment as viewed from all vantage points. These buildings are certainly way less obtrusive than the structures that already exist and that are already visible from the different viewing points. In fact, when you look at the site from those key vantage points, your eye is drawn immediately to the Bunker Bay Resort and some of those large and imposing houses that already dot the landscape. I expect, this is just my view, that once this development is finalised, yes, those will still be the structures that your eye is immediately drawn to. The new structures will be visible if the gaze lingers, but I don't think they will be the thing that you notice first. I think you're still going to notice what's there first before you see the new structures. I don't think I needed an updated VIA to form that view. I think the information in the existing VIA and the new images provided by the applicant showing the different clearing scenarios are adequate to allow me to make that decision. So for me, my previous concerns have been addressed, and therefore I would have struggled to refuse the application for the reasons contained in the city's RA or any other. From a vision and design point of view, this is a great proposal. It's thoughtful, respectful, low intensity, light on the ground, high quality design in a great location. It's clearly supported by tourism agencies, and it appears that there's general community support for it as well. And from the assessment outlined in the city's previous RA, the proposal appears to meet the requirements or the other requirements of the underlying planning framework. It would be a big pity if this development didn't go ahead and it was ultimately replaced with a proposal that might tick more of those three boxes, but didn't come close to the vision and quality of the design currently proposed. That is why I'm moving the alternate recommendation for approval. I would like to move, however, as part of doing that, some amendments to the draft conditions provided. Firstly, I would like to delete condition 3(1)(b), which requires additional mitigation measures to reduce the visual prominence of the communal building, and I would seek a seconder for that amendment. Thank you, Member Hyde. The reason for that amendment is I don't think any additional mitigation measures are required for that building. This is a low-scale building, as I've said before, with a light design and colours and materials that blend well with the existing landscape. In my view, it is going to have minimal visual impact from key viewing points in the context of the other structures that already exist in the vicinity of the site. Instead, and I'll move that as a separate amendment if this one is successful, I would suggest we add extra wording to the condition dealing with colours and materials to require some careful consideration of how that building looks, if anything. And behind a seconder, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you. I concur with your statements, presiding member. I find this to be already an altered landscape, and it's the landscape in which this development has very hard to nestle itself, to use more natural, low-key colours and materials, and therefore I find that they've gone as far potentially as they could do. I don't believe other mitigation measures, including landscape, would assist in that regard. In fact, I think that might bring into line some conflicts with bushfire management and set that cycle going yet again. So I'm comfortable with the location, but I do respect your foreshadowing an alternate wording with perhaps some further investigation of or refinement potentially of the material palette, which I think might be acceptable to adequately deal with the concerns that the Shire may have.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? Councillor Ryan.
tough decision, and initially I was looking at a deferral, which was a suggestion of the proponents.
Sorry,
in
Councillor Ryan, we're just dealing with the amendment now.
Oh, okay. Yep. No.
We're just dealing with that amendment to delete condition 3(1)(b). Do you have anything you want to talk about on that amendment?
No, that's great. Thank you.
No. All right. If that's the case, then I will put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried 4-1. I would then seek to delete condition 3.2, which requires an updated visual impact assessment. Do I have a second?
Would you like to include in that 314E and 37F, which would reference VIA?
I would like to. Yes, we can deal with those on block. So delete condition 3.2, 3.7F, and condition 3.40E. All three of which require an updated VIA. Do I have a second? Seconded. Thank you, Member Hyde. Look, the reason for all three of those is I don't think there is a need or purpose for that additional work given the impact in the context of the existing landscape. We're making a decision on this today. I don't think the updated VIA will be of much extra benefit. Would you like to talk to that?
I agree with what you said. I think what we're dealing with here is clearance in the very foreground or in close confinement of the chalets, and I think the VIA that we have previously seen informed those longer distance views. I do not believe, on the basis of what we've heard either from the Shire or from the proponent about what's being proposed to be removed and the tweaking of the I suppose the coordinates of the built form, that is going to cause any additional impact. And I'm satisfied with the VIA that we currently have as sufficient to inform my decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against this specific amendment? No? Let's put it to a vote. All those in favour? Against? That is carried 4-1. I would then like to amend condition 3.5, which refers to the schedule of external materials and finishes, to add the following wording after the first sentence. The colours, materials and finishes should be selected to ensure the development blends well with the surrounding natural environment and minimises any visual impact as viewed from key viewpoints. I suggest we also add the wording unless otherwise approved by the City of Busselton at the end of the condition. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. The reason I seek to add that additional wording, it's just that it'll ensure extra care is taken in colour and material selection during detailed design to minimise any visual impact of the development, to ensure that any future, and the second part of that amendment is to ensure that any future changes to that might arise through design development, implementation or future maintenance can be dealt with without the need for further approval by this panel. And behind, do you wish to speak? Or
in that I concur with your comments, and it does provide greater clarification and qualification of the condition as it currently worded.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against? Member Hyde.
Just probably from a point of clarification around the intent of that wording, which references key viewpoints, presiding member, without wanting to reintroduce the potential for a further VIA, where we have already amended the conditions to delete to VIA. I wonder if there needs to be some reference to the fact that we're satisfied with the current VIA and it's or you know what key viewpoints. It's sort of, to my mind, still ever so slightly open-ended, and I don't want to encourage reassessment of that visual analysis through the rewording of this as proposed.
Okay, I understand what you are saying, and I guess we The reason I didn't change that is because that was captured in the original condition that the proponent was happy with. So
Okay.
I think we need to be careful about debating back and forth, but as point of clarification, I think that the assessment of whether the colours and materials will minimise the visual impact should take into consideration not just on site, but as viewed from other places. So I'm happy to keep that wording as it is. If you're not happy with that, move an alternate amendment.
Maybe just an advice note that explains the intent of it.
I'm happy for you to include that when you talk to the substantive. Yep. Okay. Does any other member wish to speak? Do you wish to speak further to that amendment?
No.
Okay. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? Let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous, thank you. I would then like to shift, it's technically a removal of condition 4, but it's really moving it. I'd like to remove condition 4, which relates to contributions, the two different types of contributions from the section of conditions that require this to be dealt with prior to commencement of works. And I'd rather have that condition sitting in the section that is prior to occupation, use of development. Do I have a seconder for that?
Where are you? Sorry.
The condition 4 currently sits in the prior to commencement of work section. I think it's more appropriate to be in the prior to occupation, use of development section of conditions. Second. Thank you, Member Hyde. The reason is I'm not saying the condition isn't a good one. It is. I just think it's more reasonable generally to require contributions to be made prior to commencement of use rather than to commencement of works on site. Do you wish to add?
I concur.
Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No. All those in favour? Again, did you vote for that, Councillor Cox? Yes? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. And my last amendment is something that's popped up more recently in a few applications we've dealt with. That is to amend condition 5.4, which relates to the section 70A notification. And the amendment is to change the requirement for the owner to prepare and lodge the notification to provision of consent instead, should the local government or other public authority wish to lodge the notification. And I'll explain why if I have a seconder. The change would also need to be accompanied by deletion of advice note 12 and insertion of a new advice note that clarifies that this does not result in any obligation for the local government to prepare and lodge the notification. Any actions to be undertaken should also occur before occupational commencement use rather than prior to building. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, Member Hyam, and Member Hyam is seconding because he knows that this has popped up quite a bit recently. We've had some legal advice in recent times that clarifies that the obligation to lodge any section 70A notification on the title under the Transfer of Lands Act 1893 ultimately rests with the local government and not the applicant. So we've all been doing it wrong all this time. This can only be executed by the local government, though, if the landowner has given consent for the notice to be lodged. There's also no obligation on the local government to lodge the notice, even if the landowner gives consent. But if the local government does proceed with the notification, the associated costs rest with the local government. So in summary, any section 70A notification that the city would want to be placed on a title, city has to do it or initiate that with the consent of the applicant, not the other way around. So that's interesting advice that has been given. Member Hyam, do you wish to speak further to that amendment?
Yes, thank you. I remember, perhaps I could read out.
That would be great.
The actual wording of the new condition. And that would read, prior to commencement of use, the landowner shall provide consent to a notification pursuant to section 70A of the Transfer of Land Act 1893, being placed on the certificate of title of lot 501, diagram 422165, stating, and it states the two paragraphs in italics, and I don't think you need the lodgement is the last sentence in that current condition, so that's deleted. And then the replacement of advice note 12 would read, condition 5.4 is not imposing an obligation on the local government. If the local government chooses to lodge a notification under section 70A, the proponent's obligation is to give their consent to the local government application and nothing more. So I fully support that based on the advice that we've received fairly consistently now. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hyam. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? So all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. That concludes my commentary on the alternate motion. I will now refer to the seconder of the alternate motion to speak to that substantive motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Presiding Member. I'm happy to support this development. I'm also familiar with the site and the general location, and I do concur it is a challenging site, and obviously the proponent and the Shire have come to that conclusion as well. The land holding, as far as I'm aware, is no longer viable as an agricultural site. And so this proposal, I believe, supports the intent of the local planning strategy to achieve a balanced outcome for this land holding. Yes, it will alter the landscape from key vantage points, such as Cape Naturalist Lighthouse and Cape Naturalist Road, and an identified significant travel route corridor. However, in my opinion, and this is the information that I've gleaned personally, but also from the VIA that was prepared, the landscape has been modified over a considerable period of time since settlement, and we're not dealing with very much original native vegetation. I accept the clarification that was provided today. The site has been historically cleared and some regrowth has occurred. Some of that regrowth, I surmise, might be as the result of some seed transference from the Bunker Bay Resort, which was also cleared land prior to that development 2 or 3 decades ago. As I've already said, and has been borne out by the technical opinions, Agonus flexuoso is a great tree, but it does seed very well and it grows very, very well in these conditions. So the removal of some of that understory and the revegetation, which may use similar, I don't believe to be a major threat to the environment. And I do take the point that on balance, life does outweigh some of that minor clearance that needs to occur. In terms of the view corridors, there are, as the presiding member has said, other private properties along the coast which stand out far more in my line of sight anyway. And their colour palette, their chosen colour palette, I find does not blend with the landscape. On the contrary, this development, I believe, has been designed to nestle into the landscape with sensitive materials and colours, and it's distributed amongst the landscape, which I feel allows it to nestle rather than sit as a group of large buildings in close proximity. I don't agree with the statements proposed by the DPLH that this is indeed absolutely contrary to SPP 6.1. The visual findings the DPLH has issued says that multiple chalets would be prominently visible in views towards the southeast, including views from Cape Naturalist Road leaving the Lighthouse precinct. I don't find the alterations to the view corridors to be of significant impact or visually intrusive. As previously stated, I find that there are other private homes on the landscape which are of more significance and are more intrusive. The landscape character that this development is proposed into is altered, and I think the use of those natural materials and colours make this development recessive. I think the proposal complies with the statement from SPP 6.1 that the land may be suitable for tourism. Furthermore, SPP 6.1 does consider low impact tourist development in rural locations where the development will not affect the character of the area and comprises only of buildings or structures which are small in scale and unobtrusive, which in my view, as I've stated, this is therefore consistent with those statements and also the transport and environmental policies of that SPP. In terms of local planning policy 21, I find that this proposal can be compatible with the maintenance and enhancement as far as practical of the existing rural and scenic character of the locality. The proposal is seeking to maintain much of the existing vegetation, some of which is relatively recently established. And in addition, introduce some low fire vegetation and also manage the understory to reduce the fire risk in accordance with the relevant standards and SPP 3.7. It will manage the potential for habitat and whilst maintaining some areas which are cleared. Those cleared areas currently contribute to the history of the land as a farming area. In that regard, I find that it maintains that rural character. There seems to be general agreement now between the bushfire experts, and I thank them for their collaboration. That with some landscape management, that the development satisfies those requirements of SPP 3.7, which, as the presiding member said, were our key concerns when we last saw this and requested a deferral. I find there to be no other significant impacts from traffic or other functions of the development. And furthermore, I find that the proposal will add to the economic development of the locality with this tourism experience. So I'm happy to support. I would suggest, if I may, a couple of further amendments. First, to delete 3.4a and 3.4d, which references spring surveys and habitat surveys.
I have a seconder for that amendment. I will second.
Yeah. Sorry, were you waving at me then?
I was scratching.
Oh, okay, sorry. Difficulty when one has to have specs on and off. But, sorry. I would like to delete these from the RDAP decision because I believe that these matters are a matter which happen at a state level and to some degree potentially, who knows, but at a Commonwealth level. And I'm more comfortable with decisions around these surveys and assessment to be taken in the broader context at that state or at that national level. I believe that context is important to decision making. That's not to say that those decision making authorities don't look at things in the local microcosm. They do, obviously, but I believe that they have that ability to take the broad and balanced view.
Thank you. I have nothing further to add. I think that was comprehensive. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? Let's put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? It's carried 4-1. Back to you.
Thank you. And one other would be a new advice note related to condition 3.5 to provide some explanation. My wording would be, seeking a seconder, the intention of this condition is to consider materiality in the context of the approved plans and is not intended to reintroduce the need for a revised or new visual impact assessment.
Thank you. Thank you. Seconded. Member Hyam, do you wish to speak to the reason?
I don't think I do because it relates to my previous statement related to 0.5. Thank you.
Member Hyam, do you wish to speak to that amendment?
Fully support the
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
I have nothing further to say, thank you.
Nothing further to say. Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against the substantive motion? Councillor Ryan, this is your opportunity.
Oh, thank you. Once again, tough decision, but listening to what all the members have relayed and clarifying the concerns, I have had my concerns soothed. I was looking at potentially another deferral, but I think what's been ironed out just now will come up with a good solution. I do share the concerns about the land was previously farmed. And similarly, when we had the last meeting, the huge concern at that time was the fire issues. And it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, are we allowed to clear? No. But we have bushfire issues. We have huge bushfire issues in this region, and that is the concern, especially in those areas where there's really only one road in and one road out. So we need to be mindful of all those things. I believe, like yourselves, that the development is a sympathetic one. If you look at the visuals of Bunker Bay, from the air, I don't believe that if anybody put that kind of development up these days, it would be approved. So I think looking at a sympathetic development, this one meets it all. I hope that the developers can work with the city to iron out all those things. And as was previously said, there are still a lot of hoops to jump over as far as the clearing permits by government agencies and so on. So I think this is probably an approval that we need to grab and say, let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Cox, do you wish to speak to the substantive?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Member Hyam.
Thank you. Look, in my view, this is a development that's certainly worthy of approval. Again, in my view, I think it's satisfied to a very large extent the objectives of the local planning scheme and the local planning policies. And I know there may be some disagreement around that, but it's been a difficult one. Obviously, there's that tension between all those elements, such as the tourist development, the fire safety requirements, the ecological requirements. And I agree with the comments that have already been made that our priority of all those things ought to be personal safety. And I'm happy to see that the fire issues have been resolved and we can move forward knowing that there is a very high degree of fire safety involved in this. Again, I agree with the nature of the development. It's a small footprint on a very large site, and I think it's been done very sympathetically within the landscape there. In terms of the visual impact, I again agree with previous speakers that I don't think there is a huge visual impact. There may be some, but that impact is nowhere near the sort of impact that we see in other parts of that coastline. So from my point of view, I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you very much. As mover of the alternate, I have nothing further that I need to add in closing. So I'm going to put that amended alternate to the vote now. All those in favour? Against? Is carried 4-1. To our agenda for today, item 4 is Form 2 DAP applications. There are nil. Item 5, Section 31, SAT reconsideration. So Part D, other business. Item 1, SAT application, Supreme Court appeals. All information on SAT applications for the DAPs are listed on our website. With that, I will draw the meeting to a close at 11:20 p.m. I'll thank everyone. I'll thank the City of Busselton staff for coming all the way up here to attend this meeting. Thank you for that. Thank you, councillors, for participating, and to the applicant team and my fellow. And as usual, thanks to the Secretariat for your hard work. See you next time.
Thank you.